All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today for MassDEP's Organic Subcommittee meeting. My name is John Fisher with MassDEP. I'm joined by a number of MassDEP staff here today, but in particular, Rob Taccio is going to be helping me manage the chat as we go. Once we get into things here, I'm looking for a lot of interaction and participation on the call here today. This is intended to be an interactive session. We'll be beginning with a panel discussion, and I'll have some questions to feed the panel initially, but then we'll be opening things up for some open Q&A and discussion. I did schedule this meeting for 2.5 hours, a little bit longer than our customary 2-hour meeting time, in the hopes that that would allow adequate time for all the discussion and Q&A that we hope to have here today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Here's our meeting agenda here for this morning. I'll start with just a review of our planned meetings and process and talk about where we're at and where we're going here with our program and policy development. I will give just a very brief picture, a very brief capacity background information on kind of where we're at, Massachusetts. Then we'll be going into our panel discussion. We'll have some time for each of our panelists to introduce themselves and their companies. We have a total of 6 panelists here this morning. And then we'll dive into our Q&A. Again, I'll have a couple questions to get things started, and then we'll open things up to all the participants here this morning. And then at the end, we'll kind of talk about next steps and where we're going. The goal of all of this, I'll just say at the beginning, is to provide some information, some context, some guidance for us at MassDEP as we think about how we're moving forward with advancing food waste diversion in Massachusetts, and think about how we can do that in the most effective way possible. So that's what we're looking for here this morning. Back in 2025, as part of our solid waste master plan review, MassDEP held a number of meetings across a number of subcommittees and work groups, including this one. And we had some discussion about a potential expanded food waste disposal ban, what that might look like, how that might work, and what it might take for that to be successful. Over the course of those discussions, it became pretty clear that there were a number of issues that we needed to spend some more time talking about. We needed to get some more stakeholder input. We needed to give some more thought to our program and policy development and how to do this the right way. So we developed a plan over the course of 2026 to hold a number of topically focused meetings on different aspects of food waste reduction and diversion in Massachusetts. So those meetings were intended to be held over the course of calendar year 2026. We wanted to raise questions and concerns at those meetings. We wanted to address and identify barriers to moving forward and needs to help us move forward. On the flip side of that, we wanted to identify what the opportunities are, and then try to begin to develop the strategies to make those opportunities reality. So we are kind of, I don't know what portion of the way through our process, but we're partway through our process. We're on our third meeting so far. So we started off kind of going from the top of the hierarchy, or the food waste scale, if you prefer. So starting with food waste prevention and reduction, moving to food donation and rescue. And now here this morning, we're going to be talking about our management capacity for what really amounts to food waste, material that's not diverted through either prevention or reduction strategies or reduction in donation. And as we've done in our first 2 meetings, we're taking kind of a panel approach to doing this. It has been helpful in our first 2 meetings to get kind of the reality from the field, hear from people whose companies are out there running these facilities, and think about what it really takes to make this work, and really get more insight than we can deliver. Plus, you don't listen to me speaking the whole time. We get a much more interactive and kind of multifaceted discussion. So that's what we're after here this morning. So you can see as we go, we still have a number of other topics that we want to frame for additional discussion. and we'll be working on those over the course of the calendar year. I think it's a pretty good bet. We'll be taking July and August off from these meetings. Pretty difficult to schedule these meetings in July and August. Lots of vacations. People are kind of taking downtime, so it's tough to get a good turnout and participation in July and August. So we'll likely be picking that up in September, but that will also give us an opportunity to work through all the input that we've gotten in these first two meetings and begin to put together some ideas and strategies for moving forward. So, quick background, this is really abbreviated and I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but just to give you a little bit of a snapshot about where we're at. So food waste continues to represent the largest portion of our trash, despite the progress we've made so far. So it's a neighborhood of 24%. Quick note, that's a little bit higher on the residential side than the commercial and institutional side. It's about in the 25 something percent versus 21% residential versus commercial. Our goal in our 2030 solid waste master plan is to get to a total annual food waste reduction and diversion of 780,000 tons by 2030. We're at 370,000 tons as of 24, which is good progress from our initial baseline. We started around 100,000 tons, so that was great progress. But that progress has leveled off a little bit, and we got a long way to go. And it's pretty clear we need to capture more food material from smaller sources to continue to make effective progress going forward. These capacity numbers are I'm framing them as estimates. They are composed of some hard numbers, but there's a lot of variability here, and there's some uncertainty with some of these numbers. So I'm using words like estimated and about because these are rough pictures of what our management capacity looks like. There are factors that could swing these numbers upwards, and there are factors that could swing them downwards. But ballpark, we have about 500,000 tons of current capacity to manage food material in Massachusetts. I'll note that that's in Massachusetts. Food waste management capacity in the Northeast has really become increasingly a regional capacity. In fact, we have folks here on our panel here this morning that represent some of that capacity outside of Massachusetts. So really a more comprehensive view would be to look at management capacity across the region, but that's obviously a more complex analysis. We do believe we have some potentially available capacity in the neighborhood of about 140,000 tons, but even if all that capacity is effectively in place, we would still need about 270,000 tons beyond that to meet our 2030 disposal reduction goals. So any way you look at it, we need additional capacity. We also believe we need more distributed capacity to make our food waste management system more cost effective, to reduce transportation costs, to reduce collection and hauling costs by having more facilities more closely located to the point of food waste generation. So it's not just how much capacity, but it's also where the capacity is. That's an important factor. So thinking about not just the statewide capacity, but the distribution of that capacity is important. This is a real quick snapshot of how our food waste diversion has changed since 2016. Not going to go through all of these numbers, but you'll see the overall growth of anaerobic digestion. That's dropped off and really hasn't been growing over the past few years. In fact, there are a couple of facilities that have taken downtime. And so the anaerobic digestion growth has slowed. We've seen a drop off in composting tonnage. I do believe that composting tonnage in animal feed here is underreported to some degree. I can't tell you exactly by how much, because if I knew that, I'd add it to the data. But we believe there's some underreporting in the composting and animal feed section. But this gives you kind of a general picture of how we've been doing. And you can kind of see the flattening out of the progress over the past couple of years and the need to kind of seek some further strategies to further grow our progress. So again, just kind of a snapshot about where we've been over the past few years in Massachusetts. One more thing about capacity. We have panelists today representing kind of really the first three rows of this chart here. We also have Some of our panelists are engaged in both collection of food material and in sort of some ancillary activities like depackaging of packaged food material. So I've tried to put together a panel here that's pretty representative of different aspects of the food waste management system in Massachusetts. It's a challenging thing to do because it's a diverse system with a lot of different types of operations. I've also tried to get some geographical diversity in who's represented on the panel here today. But with that said, it's difficult to capture all the perspectives and all the different infrastructure we have in the state and in the surrounding states. But I've taken my best shot at doing that through the panel here today. As we go, we'll start with each panelist introducing themselves and their company and what they do. Another kind of dynamic I know in our discussion here today will be that different forms of food waste management capacity have different benefits. They have different pros and cons. And you know, my personal belief about that, and the approach that MassDEP has taken, we've kind of essentially been what I think of as technology agnostic in food waste management capacity. We permit what comes to us and meets our regulations. We give grants through our grant programs to all of these technologies, and when we deliver assistance through our Recycling Works in Massachusetts program, we direct businesses and institutions to potentially all of these facilities, depending on kind of what's available in the marketplace. So we try to take kind of an agnostic approach. I think there's places for all the technologies and all the systems we're talking about here today. And with that, I will wrap up my introductory comments and kind of get to the meat of things here. So I'm not going to introduce our panelists beyond their name and company here, but what we'll do here is go kind of in alphabetical order by company name, give each panelist an opportunity to introduce themselves and their companies real quickly, just a couple minutes each. Some panelists have slides, some do not, so I'll pull up those slides as we go. And we'll get right into things here. So I will start by introducing Andrew from Black Earth Compost.
Thank you, John. So Black Earth Compost, our model is decentralized composting in Massachusetts. And that means facilities that handle about 50 to 100 tons of food waste per week, each facility. So this graphic on the right shows you how they could be laid out. Really, there should be 30 in here to handle all the residential food waste in Eastern Mass, but to make the graphic simple, I just have a few. What you can see is that we place our facilities right where the resource is, so yard waste and food waste. And that's produced by homeowners and residents. So our model is really ideal for municipal collection of residential material and the downtown commercial. Since we're driving through town anyways, we can grab that stuff for a good price. This works because we're driving short distances from the collection to the compost facility. We're also avoiding traffic because we're taking state roads. We're taking, local roads. We're not forging our way through, I-90 to get to a centralized facility. So all this means that it's lower cost for the collection service for the residents. One other benefit is the residents actually get more pride in the business and in their participation because they understand what's happening. They know the local compost facility. They know what compost does. It's going to local farms to produce food that gets back to them. So more pride leads to more participation and better participation, right? That's something town managers ask us all the time. How do we get people signed up? It's pride. Another benefit to decentralized composting is the system's robust, right? Composting itself is a robust, process. And when you have multiple facilities, they can rely on each other. And we haven't had to do that because it's in our time. And with residential material and this model, it's great because there's no depackager waste, right? When residential material goes through a depackager, it creates a lot of trash. a lot of reject, because residential stuff is a lot of like hard materials that don't liquefy well. Bones, rinds, cobs, skins, compostable packaging. So if you want 30% of that's going in the trash, then send it to a DPAC. Or if you want it all recycled, you send it to a composter. And finally, we're next slide, John. So the food the finished compost goes out. Oh, can you go back one? The finished compost goes out to the local area, to local farms to grow food. And that makes healthier food, healthier people, and it really makes a stronger Massachusetts, which is what the goal of MassDEP should be. Next slide. So I said we need 30 facilities. That sounds crazy, right? But we're actually doing it. We have 4 right now inside 495, more or less. We have another one that we're going to announce soon this summer that will be near 128. And we have one down in Connecticut, the SCARA facility that state of Connecticut gave SCARA a bunch of money to build, which is cool. But we have 4 facilities going on 5, and then there's another 4 food waste composters in the area, so that's 9. So we're actually kind of close to the 30, right? And it's important to remember we're managing yard waste and food waste. And John asked me for numbers. I think right now we're doing 340 tons of food waste per week come through our facilities to be composted, and we have about 170 tons per week of additional capacity between our sites. That's it.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Okay, next I'm going to turn to Laxmi with Bright Feeds. I'll pull up your slide here.
Hi, I'm Lakshmi Wurdam. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Bright Feeds. A little bit about our company. We launched our first facility, our manufacturing facility, outside of Hartford, Connecticut, in Berlin, Connecticut. We are permitted for 450 tons a day. That is our manufacturing site. And we started pulling in food from across New England. As we grew, we realized that we needed to have a better solution for managing logistics. And so in January 2024, we opened a transfer station in Oxford, Massachusetts. I believe Oxford, Massachusetts is permitted for about 300 tons per day. We are at about half capacity right now. So we do have a lot of space there to bring in more food from across the state and across New England. We have a depackager at Oxford, so we depackage there and then take the depackaged material to Berlin for manufacturing. Our manufacturing process is, we really started this with the idea to add technology and make it a more efficient, smarter process to turn food into animal feed, to really extract the full value of the food. We wanted to create a highly nutritious, consistent, high flowability product to feed mostly dairy cows, pigs, and hogs. And we sell to some of the largest mills and farms in the area. We really sell in New England and then in Western New York as well. The beauty of our technology is that we can take a high variable inputs of food and through our sensors and our efficiency in drying, which we have patented, we can create a consistent product. We also can customize blends for different customers. So that sort of allows us to really extract the full value out of the food. We can take most pre-consumer food. So we don't touch really municipal or residential. We really source most of our food from food manufacturers, distributors, and then any retail establishments that can separate pre-consumer, if you will. The best products for us are really the dryer material. Most of our costs on the production side or the manufacturing side are in our drying. We have to get our product down to 10% moisture. So really a lot of that cost is in the drying. So the drier the product, the better it is for us. Although we do take in mixed food, but we really don't take in any liquids as an example. We also provide kind of custom installs. We have our own fleet. We don't want to be in the logistics business, but we realize to be able to offer good customer service to our food manufacturers, et cetera, we do have to provide that. And we try to, really limit the transportation by doing these installs that really maximize the food that we're going to be transporting to our facilities. But really how we see ourselves growing is partnering with others on this panel, other providers, whether it's on the hauling side or, other recycling providers, where we kind of try to figure out what is the best food type for the best solution. And again, the drier the product, we think that's we are the best solution for that. But we are trying to, with our facility in Oxford, we can set aside product that's not best for us, and then kind of share with others, anaerobic digesters, composters, et cetera. And so we're really trying to create an ecosystem, a network that has us partnering with, other providers that really creates the best solution for Massachusetts. I look forward to your questions, but that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Roger. Okay, next I'm going to turn it over to Brian with Circular Services Group.
Thanks, John, and thanks everyone for having us be part of this conversation today. My name is Brian Paganini. I am the Vice President of Organics for Circular Services. I was one of the founders of the Quantum Biopower facility in Connecticut, and that facility is one of 10 organics recycling facilities that we have within our sort of operating group across the United States, mostly centered around Florida, Texas, and a lot of the areas of the United States where we have existing material recycling facility operations. But specifically in Connecticut, we built in 2013 a pretty comprehensive organics recycling campus that really looked at both sides of the organics recycling coin, which we define organics as both food waste and woody biomass recycling. So on the Connecticut campus, we're recycling food waste up to 40,000 tons per year in our current built capacity through a depackaging process and an anaerobic digester, and repurposing a lot of the digestate residues into a finished composting process, and then taking those materials and now bagging them for our commercial partners in the Northeast area. The facility is built for 40,000 tons of capacity. It is currently at capacity. We are planning on expanding the campus and expanding the anaerobic digester in Connecticut. We also do have a small logistics fleet where we're doing collections in the Connecticut area and also southern Massachusetts. So we do collect from retail grocers and other customers in the southern Massachusetts footprint. But generally speaking, I think the way that we approach organics recycling is looking at ways to create usable end products through both food waste and woody waste into soils and compost, and getting those materials back into circulation, whether that's in the bulk or in the bag. So again, looking forward to chatting with folks on this call today and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Brian. One quick clarification. I know you explained you have an AD process and a depackaging process. Did you say that you also operate a compost site as part of the same campus?
We do. That's correct.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Okay. Now I'm going to turn to Chris from Divert Inc. And I'll pull up your first slide here.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm Chris Thomas, Divert's VP of Public Affairs. Divert's headquartered in Concord, Massachusetts, and many of us Divert leaders are located around the U.S. I happen to be based in the Seattle, Washington area. We are a circular economy company on a mission to prevent food from being wasted. And we've centered our mission around the wasted food crisis because it's a relatively easy climate change problem to address with good solutions and good infrastructure. We use data and technology to help wasted food company customers ensure that food products they cultivate, uh, manufacture, distribute, or sell are more likely to be consumed by customers or donated to those in need. We structure our contracts so that customers are incentivized to waste less over time. We also find productive use for food products that can't be sold or donated by transforming them into renewable natural gas, a nitrogen-rich liquid fertilizer, and a soil amendment for local composters. We've grown to serve nearly 8,000 unique retail store and food manufacturing distribution locations. And we've been opening new facilities around the US to perform all these services under a single roof, starting with Turlock, California, in December of 2024, Longview, Washington, earlier this year, and Lexington, North Carolina this summer. Next slide, John. So we're talking about Massachusetts capacity today, and it's really important to talk about what types of capacity are needed to address different types of food. The large food companies that we tend to work with handle massive quantities of food at scale, and they tell us that our wasted food products are often not compatible with curbside organic systems that were built for mostly unpackaged, locally generated, and manually manageable yard waste. And they typically accept only limited quantities of food. The curbside system works really well, but sometimes lacks the capacity or the infrastructure to address the scale of businesses that are required to comply with new organics management laws and today's complex food packaging system. Food companies that send their products to our facilities often increase their overall food waste recovery rates. And the data that we collect demonstrates that they ultimately recover about 2 to 4 times more food products that previously went into trash compactors because these facilities can accept difficult to process food that is often deeply embedded in packaging. More importantly, in addition to landfill diversion, these companies are able to focus on food waste prevention. Once they're able to leverage the data and analytics and intervention, and also receive intervention efforts directly through site visits and training, they begin to improve source reduction and food donation. Next slide, please. The mechanical depackaging service we provide helps customers realize diversion goals at an industrial level scale. And as the state considers whether there's enough capacity in place to process wasted food that would otherwise go to the landfill, we believe that a variety of solutions, including depackaging, needs to be part of that solution. We recently saw your neighboring state, Vermont, raise questions about depackaging equipment. And as you consider how to expand the Massachusetts policy, which we believe is a good one and has served customers really well for over a decade, we would ask you to consider just requiring strong permitting standards for any new depackaging systems that are coming to market. Vermont took an approach to effectively prohibit depackaging because there's a perception that it has low organics recovery rates or that it cannot safely remove plastic contaminants from finished compost or soil amendment products. Those concerns are very reasonable, but our own data here suggests that these concerns can easily be addressed. The best way to depackage is to have a robust system in place. And if you want to maximize efficiency, a robust permitting process can address that. And the best way to minimize contamination is to have strict performance-based testing in place. Last slide, John. I was just going to wrap up.
Yeah, okay. Just going to say, got a minute left.
We believe that the system we built solves a unique problem because in addition to maximizing wasted food recovery and waste prevention, it is both carbon negative and circular, and it creates large amounts of water and energy while producing fertilizer and soil amendment products that can be used to regenerate our food supply chain. Look forward to addressing any questions and engaging in our discussion.
Great, thank you. Okay, next I'm going to turn to John with Second Chance Composting.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. Glad to be here today and share what we're doing. As John said, my name is John Pitroff, owner and founder of Second Chance Composting. We are based in Adams, Massachusetts. We were founded in 2022. At this point, we're currently serving Western Massachusetts with a kind of stronger focus on Berkshire County and Hampshire County as well. We do a little bit of work in southern Vermont. That's actually where we started because we're at a really great location as far as really close to Vermont and really close to New York. So John mentioned a little bit earlier about materials from other places, which is a larger conversation, but we're kind of in an ideal place to help with that as well. A little bit about us and myself, 2023 Mass Recycle Individual Award winner for the Recycler of the Year. That was my second year in business, so I'm pretty proud that we're able to do that and bring that back to here in Western Mass. 2022 Vermont Compost Operator Certification Program graduate. Again, we started there originally. Stamford, Vermont is about 15 minutes from where we were living, so we got certified there first. I'm also on the town of Adams. I'm the alternate commissioner for the Northern Berkshire Solid Waste Management District, which is helpful to share about composting because, believe it or not, a lot of people in these positions of authority or power don't really know that much about composting. But I also learn a lot there as well. It's been a really good role for me to get in and learn, not only what we should be doing, but what's happening with things as well. And I just took on a new role in, again, Southern Vermont with the Bennington County Solid Waste Alliance. So I'm the outreach and education coordinator for that. And I've learned a lot there very quickly already. I hold composting certifications from Rutgers University, Louisiana State University, Ohio State University, Michigan State University, MassDEP, and Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And that's my family there. The inspiration for starting the business and for keeping it going. So next slide, please. So what we do is we offer drop-off, hauling, and processing of food scraps and other organic material, leaves, wood chips, manure, sawdust, also yard waste as well. A big part of our business model since day one is to create a high-quality end product. That's actually the reason I started the business and kind of work back from there. So we sell high quality nutrient-rich compost and mulch locally here from the things that we've hauled. So for me, that part is really how we think of everything is how are we going to create a really high quality product for people that can put in their gardens, local farms, that type of thing. Every decision I make comes from that. We also are big into community events, outreach, and education. The first 5 years of the business, 4.5 years of the business was doing as much as we possibly could education-wise to get out and educate people about this. And I've kind of taken that role now to Vermont to do the same there. Consulting services as well. So quickly here, in less than 4 years, we built 3 composting facilities from the ground up, basically raw land. First was in Stamford, Vermont, which we grew out of very quickly. And then we moved to Cheshire, Massachusetts, which was closer, and we were able to expand there. And then we quickly grew out of that, thanks to a lot of help through DEP with grants and just a lot of hard work. And we're currently in Savoy at our facility. Everything is done in-house with us, similar to Black Earth. We bring everything to our facility, we manage it all, and then we return the finished compost to the local soils here. So it's a totally circular system. It's community-based. During that time, we've diverted 1,348.441 tons of organic material from disposal. And then you can see the tonnage for food, specifically for food scraps there in a pretty short amount of time. We kind of work from the base of building community, making it sustainable, thinking about the future, and doing it together with other places. That's my contact information if you need. That's what we're about. We're about giving love and growing life. That's my mom and my daughter there. One's holding food scraps. That's, becoming the compost that my daughter River's holding there. So this is a generational thing. This is the future. This is what we're doing. And down the bottom there, you also have Roscoe the optimist. He's really happy because he's compost. He wants people to feed him because he's becoming something good for the future. So that's what we're about. Glad to be here and excited to share some more with you guys.
Great. Thank you, John. Okay, now I'm going to turn to Kip with Vanguard Renewables.
Yeah, John, I'll wrap us up here. Vanguard Renewables has been operating or is based in Weston, Massachusetts. We've been operating anaerobic digesters in Massachusetts for 12 years. Our process is unique. We build farm-based anaerobic digesters and operate them by using a combination of cow manure and food waste to create renewable natural gas. In Massachusetts, most of our digesters use that renewable natural gas to generate electricity, renewable energy that we resell back to energy clients across the state. Our current capacity in Massachusetts is 180,000 tons per year. We also operate a DPAC facility, organics recovery facility, we call it, in Agawam, Massachusetts, that can process about 45,000 tons per year of packaged waste and post-consumer source-separated organics. From there, that facility distributes the organic slurry to our 3 digesters in Massachusetts or our 1 digester in Vermont. We accept byproducts from food manufacturing, things like wastewater treatment sludges, high strength liquids. We accept packaged waste, pre-consumer packaged waste from distributors or grocery stores. And then we also, like I said, process post-consumer food waste as well. We generate, or we work very closely with haulers in the region to accept and manage waste coming out of their clients. In addition to that, we do have our own transportation and logistics services and toter services and routes that we run ourselves as well. We operate an additional 6 facilities around the country, both DPACs and anaerobic digesters, and we continue to build more. John, is it all right if I answer this question right now?
Oh, I didn't think I did. Sure, go for it.
Yeah. We have worked with the Grind Energy program. Like I said, we work with third parties to process organic slurry as well.
Great. Are we all set, Kip, or?
Yep. Yeah. Sorry, John. I'm wrapped up. We can move on.
I didn't know if the question was a tangent or not. Okay. Super. All right. So that's a little bit of background. Now we're going to turn to the panel discussion amongst our panelists. I have 2 questions just to get things started here today. I'm going to kind of mix up the order, bounce around the order a little bit as we go through the panel discussion. And just start with our first question here, which is, what are the greatest opportunities for your business to capture food waste from smaller sources, small businesses, and residents in Massachusetts? And what do you see as the greatest barriers to this progress? So I'm going to bounce around in the order a little bit here. So let me start with Brian here.
Yeah. So thanks for the question, John. So I heard greatest opportunities, greatest barriers. I think it goes without saying, first of all, tip the cap to the state of Massachusetts. Clearly, there's been a very strong basis of a program started from Massachusetts, specifically in terms of the strength of the diversion mandate and the program execution. I think, if I look back, and I think the study that was published in the Journal of Science maybe a year or two ago. I think what Massachusetts has done very well is that they've been able to successfully create an economic issue out of a sustainability issue. I mean, if I'm recalling the numbers correctly, close to 2,000 jobs created from diverting organics, almost $150 million in labor impact, and $200 million in overall economic value associated with diverting food waste within the state. So I think the biggest opportunity here is just to continue to parlay the success of the commercial diversion program and use those learnings to translate that into the smaller generator pickup, which is maybe residential generation. So I think for us, one thing that we're keenly interested in happening in Massachusetts is seeing more of a residential diversion program take shape. I think some of the challenges in doing that is as you noted, there's another 270,000 additional tons of capacity that is needed in the state in order to unlock more processing. That's going to mean more composting, more AD, more pre-treatment, whether that's depackaging or other, more transportation, more hauling capacity. So a stronger mandate is only going to get you so far. Obviously, we need to supply in more capacity in the state in order to hit that goal. Also worth noting that a big barrier to entry or big barrier is that residential collection is much harder than commercial collection. Supermarkets, hospitals, food manufacturers, they generate more of a predictable waste stream. Households generate smaller volumes, require many stops or sometimes disparate, which makes collection more expensive and operationally more complex. So I think to the extent that MassDEP is exploring a residential organics requirement, I think that would definitely be a signal to the marketplace that the state is looking at this level of collection. I think also another big barrier that we've wrestled with in Connecticut is the cost to municipalities and to the ratepayers. Cities and towns obviously need carts, they need liners, they need pails, they need all the things that go into a very strong residential collection program. Without grants or a shared sort of regional procurement initiative, we know Connecticut is pursuing that. Municipalities may resist the cost because they may not be aware of how costs are hitting their communities for collection, and disposal savings sometimes are slower to be realized in terms of municipal budgets. But I do think it's worth noting that the pay-as-you-throw initiatives have been very successful in Massachusetts, and seeing more of those grow, I think would be very advantageous as well. And I think the final thing that we think about in terms of barriers is just contamination. When you expand into smaller generator collection, there's an increased risk of plastic bags and glass and all the things that we don't like seeing in a good, strong organics diverted stream. Obviously, contamination rate raises up processor cost, and that impacts quality when it gets to the compost site or the anaerobic digester. So I think that's another barrier that needs to be considered as well. So those are some thoughts.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I know cost and getting good clean material separation, those are two things we're definitely focused on. Yeah. Both now and moving forward. Let me turn next to Andrew for your perspective on this question.
Sure. I think MassDEP has done an excellent job with the rollout of their food waste ban. It started in 2014, and here we are 12 years later, and it's still not fully implemented. That is great. The slow roll is how you get education, which is how you address contamination. So I think if you continue that slow roll through the residential rollout, I think that will keep contamination down. And that's because education is not a flyer in the mail once. It is doing the practice of composting over many years, having it happen in the schools, having kids come home and show it at home, seeing your neighbors doing it, seeing your grandparents do it. That's where education comes from. And if you continue that slow roll, then we'll keep the contamination levels down. I think the biggest opportunity for us is the residential market. because our business model is designed for picking up food waste from homeowners at a low cost, and getting the most diversion out of it, right? Because we're not depackaging it. And this residential material is like largely, it gets more rejected than commercial stuff because it's bones, rinds, cobs, and compostable packaging. So we get the highest diversion and we have the lowest cost for collection because our facilities are close to where the resource is being created, right? And it's important to recognize we're managing two wastes, not just food waste, but we're also handling yard waste, which is a cost. And instead of having that material trucked out to New Hampshire that municipalities have to pay for, we're handling it close to home. And then when we are trucking out, we're trucking out finished product. So another reason our model, decentralized composting, is good for residential and these small sources is our truck size. You don't need a massive CDL truck with all its volume to pick up residential, because you actually run out of time in the day before you run out of volume in the truck. So we can use our small under CDL trucks, which are lower cost to operate and drive, right? Like when you're going house to house, you have to accelerate 30 tons of metal with a CDL truck, then stop, pick up a tote, 30 tons, stop. Our trucks are much lighter, so it's more fuel efficient. And the pride is what I mentioned before. Pride is key to these programs, and decentralized composting actually creates that. So some barriers. One is municipal uncertainty. Like if they know that they're going to have to provide this service in the future, then they're going to start doing pilots and start preparing. So that would help bring, like, policy certainty would help bring municipalities into serious consideration. They're already testing the waters, but like some haven't pulled the trigger, some have. All right, now two other barriers are both land access. One is it's extremely difficult for us to be in agriculturally zoned land in Massachusetts. And that's a problem because there's actually not really land available for composting. Like composting falls into this funny gray area for zoning. Like it's hard. So often we're considered commercial or industrial. Well, that means we have to compete with warehouses and other commercial users for that space, and we can't compete dollar per square foot, right? So, and then we end up on municipal land, which seems like the only thing. Now, if agriculture zoned land was opened up, then we could have more opportunities. And I think, and just to preface, the MDAR program does not work for us at all, because that is only if you're already a farm. So we can't go in and set up a farm, make it profitable, and then set up a compost site later to be a small part of the farming operation. That doesn't work. So I would suggest that MassDEP, I suggest the state legislature amend the definition of agriculture to say that composting is considered agriculture if it's MassDEP permitted. I think that's how you get into that land and how DEP is able to maintain enforcement controls. And the North Carolina Compost Council just did this, and it's been great for them. The other barrier, again, land access, is that a lot of land that was designated for waste management is now, or was converted to energy, right? Solar fields, like all these landfills got converted to solar fields. And so that it's like, what land did the state leave for waste management? They didn't really. So, maybe Massachusetts could designate some of its state land for waste management, because there are good properties out there. It's just hard to get through all the agencies. That's it. Those are my three barriers: municipal uncertainty, agriculture zone land, and maybe you can open up state land.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me turn next to Kip and your perspective from Vanguard on this question.
Yeah, so Vanguard Renewables, we don't intend to provide collection services to residential customers. However, we do work very closely with haulers and collectors that would be implementing this type of service. We do find post-consumer food waste if it's a relatively clean waste stream to be a very good feedstock for anaerobic digestion. It's typically high strength material. And with residuals, we can process it through our organics receiving and depackaging system as well, making it a pretty good feedstock for the anaerobic digesters. We do find that while Massachusetts does have organic waste bans for small generators, it is not highly enforced, and therefore there seems to be a lack of incentive driving the type of behavior that's meant to be in place. And we would encourage further enforcement of the bans that already exist.
Okay. Let me turn next to Laxmi and your perspective on this.
Yeah, similar to, I think what Kip was saying, Bright Feeds, sees, like, we started with a lot of the large sources of food waste. As I sort of said in my opening, that kind of helps with the logistics, right? You can put one compactor, you get one full load, of food, and it just reduces the logistics there. What we're going to start to do really in the next few weeks is start doing, creating some routes around some smaller pickups. Again, we're pre-consumer, so it's the sort of smaller bakeries and sources of some of the drier product that we like. It is tricky with the logistics, trying to find that density to make it economically beneficial for both the customers and us. And we're trying to work with a lot of the smaller haulers to be able to do this. So that's really where we see the opportunity, right? We started with the larger food providers, and now we're kind of going smaller to be able to collect more of that food to transform it into something valuable. So, we're just, putting as much feelers out there, and then it's really working with, haulers and others, partners to sort of say, if the food that comes to you doesn't work out, please know and be aware that Oxford, Massachusetts is open for deliveries, and we'd like to, be a source to be able to collect as much as possible in the area, of that useful food that we can use. The barriers are really around the economics, and just trying to make, with fuel where it is, that just becomes a big barrier to making this economically viable. But then just having the incentives be right for food providers so that they separate and they comply with the rules and regulations that are in place in the state. So that really is key. Again, applauding MassDEP for the work that you've done. I think there's still more work to be done in terms of enforcement. And we're here to help with that, to provide the carrot, not the stick. But we see a lot of opportunity in some of the smaller pickups.
Okay. Laxmi, just one other clarifying question for you in terms of the materials you can accept. Are you restricted as far as meat or meat products? Is that a restriction for you?
So, yes, we are restricted on some meat products. We can take some, we can take fish, we can take chicken. It has to be cooked. We cannot take beef because we provide feed for cattle, dairy cow. We are restricted with no beef, and then again, the meat has to be cooked. So, we based on working with our nutritionists, we can have that at small inclusion rate of non-beef meat, if you will, that's cooked, but we are not a rendering.
Yeah. Okay, got it. I want to turn next to John with second chance. And John, there's also a question that came up in the chat that is specific to composting, I believe. So I want to ask for your take on this as well, which is a question about, is there enough carbon or is access to carbon a barrier to increase composting of food scraps? So maybe if you can either address that separately or address that over the course of your response to this question.
Sure, I'll do that after. I want to get through what I got here first. But all right, so the opportunities are pretty extreme for us. Remember, we're a hauler and a processor. We're already out moving material from the residential level, from the scale of, restaurants, schools, hotels, people producing smaller amounts. So I think another big distinction and something to remember is that this material is already being moved anyway. We just have to move it somewhere else. So we don't have to really reinvent the wheel. We just have to change the tire. Um, I think for us, moving at less distance is important. Like our facility is local to where we're hauling. So I think that's a big part of what we do. Same with Andrew. Um, it stays local and that builds the community around it, and that builds the education. When family members know, they tell, and that's how it grows over the years, to benefit the local community. I think for us too, it saves people money. People care about the bottom line. Being closer for processing makes it so that you don't have to go 6 hours and 42 minutes round trip up to a landfill to get rid of it. And again, it benefits everybody by staying here and becoming compost. I think an opportunity, and this is probably a longer discussion, but there's already trash haulers moving all the material in some way. That's what I'm saying. It's already being moved. So how do we figure out a way to mandate that they have to separate food scraps as well? Also, going to where it's already being brought is big. So to me, common sense is who's moving it already and where's it going. So partnering with transfer stations, I think, is huge. Residents are already bringing their stuff, their trash to transfer stations. We've set up programs at 6 municipalities where the residents just drop off their food scraps separate, and it's been very successful here. It's a simple system. I think mandating something like that would be huge, or mandating something that municipalities have to have a pickup program. Outside of that, we already have 10 drop-off locations locally for residential, plus a couple other ones that are at local libraries. So we're already managing material. We're going those places anyway. It's just more totes for us when we get there, and more money and more material. So, the more the merrier. Keep it coming. We want more. I think it's also very simple and easy for us. I mean, we only take food and food scraps, so nobody has to guess, nobody has to have a list. It's very simple. I go to a restaurant, somebody says, "Well, what do I do with this material?" Or what do you take? I say, "Well, everybody that works here works with food. Everybody knows what food is. Put it in the bucket. That's it." That's going to make it very simple. Now onto the barriers, which is a little bit longer, but I try to have some solutions in here. I'll go through this quickly. Compliance and enforcement is going to be huge. How are we going to make people do this, and how are we going to make them do it properly? Visual inspections of tied bags, I think, is a failed system. I don't think it's going to work. I think common person just going to throw it in the trash. And I don't think a letter is going to help anything. Sending people a letter of compliance, they'll just ignore it and throw it in the trash. I think working directly with the transfer stations, educating staff is important, and highlight my role on the Bennington County Solid Waste Alliance. I'm paid through the state to go into businesses, schools, go to events and educate people. I think the state should have, I know they have CET, but more of that. Also, some sort of food waste specialist in and around the DEP would be beneficial. Contamination is part of that. Huge part. If it's not done right, food scraps contaminated is just trash, right? Like it's got to be done correctly. And if we don't do it right, the whole system's going to fail anyway. So I think contamination has to be a big part of it. I'm not a trash hauler, right? I'm trying to haul a better future for people. And I think that's part of that's keeping it simple, like I said before. Also, I think the system's disconnected. There's all these great pieces, but they're not put together in a bigger puzzle piece. So we got to bring them together somehow. That's like connecting farmers to restaurants to the composters so that that can be a circular system. We work with a couple of restaurants that do that. They buy local, compost with us. Our compost goes to the local farm. Municipalities, schools, nonprofits, boards of health, zoning officials, like we got to get all these people in the know on this. Haulers and processors have to be connected better because you get a bunch of new haulers in Massachusetts. Where's the material going? Maybe that processor doesn't take the type of material they're taking. So that's a big one. And quickly here, I know I'm kind of running low on time. I think coming up with a clear definition of food waste and what it is big. Like, what are we even talking about, right? Are we talking about all food? Are we talking about compostable materials? Like, what is that? I mean, a local composter here who's done a lot of work in this, that was one of the first things he said to me, like, what does that even mean, right? Another thing for composting, Andrew touched on this, I think it's a big one, is like, are we agricultural? Are we farming? Are we industrial? Like, people don't really know how to, like, what we are. If we're not agriculture, I don't know what is, right? Like, I've written grants to try to get money to build our business, and the list is saying you must be producing this amount of material, you must have this, you must be selling the product, it must be organic matter, and then I fill it out, and they're like, oh, you can't have this because you're not farming. And I'm like, well, we're providing the very product that make all the farms run. How are we not agriculture? That doesn't make any sense. And quickly, this is the next part. I think that is connecting DEP with MDR a little bit more. There's two regulatory agents. It's the same thing in Vermont, like and they're different. The zoning is huge. Andrew was right. I mean, I'll give one quick one. There's a city close to us. I wanted a spot. The only industrial zone was downtown, like right near a school. Like it never would have worked. But on the books, that's the only place they allow composting. I found a piece of land in the same city that was way out of the way, agricultural residential zone in the woods, nobody near it. But on the books, you can't do composting there. But they want me to do it downtown where it would never work. So there's even the people making the decisions in zoning don't really understand this. I can touch on the carbon later. I just don't want to take too much time. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let me turn next to Chris for your perspective on this question.
Awesome. John, can you hear me okay with the video on?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, good. I was having some issues earlier. It's basically for Divert. We work typically with some of the largest businesses, the largest food manufacturers, the largest food retailers, and so typically the smaller sources is not an area which, particularly a strong suit in our wheelhouse because we feel like if you're a home or a very small business, typically you're going to handle the source separation part pretty well. Like you're going to be removing packaging, and you're going to be doing this separation of the purely organic material from its packaging pretty well. You're going to have a mix of yard waste with the food waste that you generate. In those cases, in the smaller, like really smaller sources, we think that type of material should go to composting all day long. It's the really big commercial type of businesses that produce vast quantities of food at scale. So the large pallets of packaged food that for whatever reason didn't meet spec that from a food manufacturer, and they have no choice but to get rid of it. Well, a hauler doesn't really want it. Composter doesn't really want it because they don't have the ability to leverage that massive amount of food that's packaged in pallets. They usually don't have enough yard waste or carbon rich green waste, if you will, to offset that and provide the proper ratio. And so that's really why divert and the material we go after is really best suited for customers, on the larger scale of that. Even grocery stores, they may have like a massive amount of unpackaged produce, but they're going to have an even bigger amount of packaged food that, the things with the wrappers tied tightly around it, the cups of yogurt that, there's no amount of time that someone can spend in the back of a store to physically remove that kind of packaging from the organics. And so in those instances, it's really important to have an industrial level mechanical solution in place. And that's really the niche that we serve. And so for the smaller sources, again, we really want to, we would recommend for Massachusetts to make sure that you have a robust curbside system in place to address that. We did take on, and we did look at some of the medium to larger sized businesses who have a need to divert large amounts of wasted food from the landfill. And we had kind of a mixed reaction from that category, candidly. Some of them were really eager to divert material and wanted to look at a service like Divert and sign up and send that material to anaerobic digestion because they recognize that might be a better solution, for large amounts of food that they had. But others, they basically said, look, we may have this organics ban in place, but we're not really eager to comply with it until someone tells us to do it. And so in those cases, John, I know you and I have had this conversation. The state's doing a really great job in implementing this policy. It's been in place for over a decade, but it's just going to take more time, more education, and frankly, more enforcement for those smaller operators to be able to move into the compliance mode. I think, frankly, some of them just straight up told us that until they're told to do it, it makes it harder for them to justify to the larger parent company or the management that sort of oversees that part of their operation. And so I would really just lean heavily on enforcement, to really capture the sort of the next step down of medium to medium-sized businesses. The large businesses that we work with, though, they're already eager to divert their material from a landfill. They recognize it's the right thing to do, but there's also an economic value to doing that.
Great, thank you. I want to take a moment to talk about compliance and enforcement because that's come up a few times, and maybe talk about it in particular relative to a potentially reduced waste ban threshold. So first, just if people don't know that MassDEP conducts waste ban inspections at solid waste facilities, we look at loads of trash that come in and then look to identify loads that have large amounts of any of our banned materials, and there's a long list. And when we do that, we look to identify the source of the load. And in most cases, we take enforcement against the waste generator. Small percentage of time, we take enforcement against a waste hauler where they've delivered separated materials for disposal. That compliance and enforcement approach, it has been implemented pretty much across the board now for food waste. We do food waste is actually, I believe, the material that we do second most enforcement for, next to cardboard. A couple notes about food waste enforcement. The half ton per week, first the 1 ton per week threshold, then the half ton per week threshold. Those are volume-based observations at the solid waste facility, and by doing inspections that way, tends to make our inspections pretty conservative about when we take enforcement. It's typically food materials broken down in the load. It's sometimes liquefied. It's sometimes in bags. So that all leads to a pretty conservative approach to enforcement, where the half ton per week threshold is being enforced definitely somewhere higher than 1/2 ton per week. If we were to drop to a lower threshold or potentially a 0 threshold, the food waste ban would work similar to how our disposal bans work for cardboard and bottles and cans and other material, where we do kind of work with suggested action levels, but we could take enforcement for any amount of banned material from a particular source, which is how we implement the ban for other waistband materials right now. So that's something to think about. Dropping to a zero threshold probably would not be enforced at zero, but maybe enforced effectively around a half ton per week. The other thing to note about waistband enforcement, just in general, is it works better with larger sources and less well for smaller sources. And we don't enforce waistbands against individuals or against residents. So when we think about a waste disposal ban and how it might work for smaller sources of food waste, it's important to consider these points in that context and to think about the fact that that doesn't mean a waistband can't be useful or an effective tool, but we just need to understand what a waistband can do effectively and where it needs to be maybe supported by other strategies and other initiatives. So maybe it's a outreach and education forward implementation of a waistband, for example. So just something to contextual information to think about, in particular, as we think about smaller sources of food waste. Doesn't mean a waistband can't be effective, doesn't mean it can be an effective component of what we're doing, but it's just going to work a little bit differently than it works for larger sources. So just something to be aware of contextually. With that, I know there's a number of questions popping up in the chat. I'm going to hold those for at least a little bit longer here and take maybe another 20 to 30 minutes here to run through this second question. So I'm going to pop that up here. And we talked about some of these things already. These questions kind of lead into each other, but the second question is, what do you see as the most important actions for MassDEP to advance management capacity to grow food waste diversion in Massachusetts, and kind of looking at management capacity across the board? Let me turn first to Laxmi for that question.
It's a good question. I mean, I think just personally speaking for for Bright Feeds, we were happy with the permitting process with MassDEP and the support that we received to open our transfer station. Things could always be, smoother and, but, we've shared that feedback directly with MassDEP. I mean, I think what would help is, I think thinking about the grant process. We've received a number of grants from MassDEP, which has been really helpful. The timeline to get those funds and some of the requirements, including the scope of work and the steps that you need to go through that, setting everything up, for example, buying some trucks. By the time we received approval on the scope of work, the truck that we had set aside had already been purchased. And so, that kind of process, if that could be streamlined or helped out in any way to be more flexible in terms of the support that MassDEP can give companies like ours, I think that would be incredibly helpful. I do also think that the way to make this work is incentives. I talked about the carrot and the stick, right? There are penalties, but I think the way to really get businesses to, do the work that you need to divert, to kind of separate the food, to find the sources, to get the logistics in place, all of that. There need to be real incentives for the companies to do that. And we think that our economic model really does help that out. But I wonder if there's any ways to divert some of that grant money to encourage the businesses also to choose these alternate solutions. I think those are my kind of only comments. But let me know if you have any follow-up questions.
Okay, thanks. Let me excuse me. Let me go next to Kip.
Yeah, this is a good question, John, and I feel like we've had a pretty strong working relationship with the MassDEP over the past 12 years. as we've operated our digesters and DPAC facility in Massachusetts. I think one of the challenges that we've encountered and been able to work through is more so the management of the residuals out of the DPAC facility and working with the DEP on properly classifying those residuals, making sure we're managing them to their best use, and in a way that makes sense for our business as well. And by residuals, I'm referring to the non-organic material that's generated through the DPAC process. So, ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to say is having a strong working relationship where we understand our business, and then I want to echo kind of what Laxmi said around creating the right incentives for the businesses as well, both the generators of the food waste, but also the processors and the haulers, ensuring that there's an ease of doing business, that this is a service line that we're all encouraged to promote, and grow within Massachusetts.
Great, thank you. I just one note. I know there was a question that came up in the chat about contact information for the panelists. So I know some folks put their contact information in the chat, but when I share the meeting information out following the meeting, I'll include contact information for the panelists when I do that. If anyone's on the call today who's not on our organic subcommittee email distribution list, or if you're not sure if you are, please share your contact information with me, and I'll get you added to that list. That's the list we use to share information about all of our meetings, upcoming meetings, information from the meetings we've held. So, reach out to me, and I'll get you added. I'll include my contact information at the end of the presentation here. So let me turn next to a composting perspective. Let me turn to John for that.
All right. A lot of this stuff I kind of touched on earlier, but I'll just reiterate a few things. I think a big part is, again, mandating the people that are already moving the material, a lot of MSW haulers, as well as mandating where the material is being brought to those transfer stations. Because from there, it doesn't really have to go that much further. So at least in our area, the transfer stations have it, and then we can come grab it pretty easily from there and keep it very local without having to go much further. Again, I'll reiterate, I think having a solid plan for contamination is big, and compliance and enforcement. And I know that it's tough at the residential level, but I think it's something we have to really give a lot of thought to. And part of that is what I mentioned earlier, is defining what is food waste. Is it meat? Is it not? Any food is to me. But that's make that clear for people, and that's leads into the next step, is making it simple and easy for the common person. All those people that are on this meeting that have a billion other things to think about in their life, that this is the last thing that they're thinking about, right? How do we make it for the common person that goes to work every day, comes home and has to take care of their kids? They don't have to overthink this. How do we make it simple for people? How do we make it convenient for them? Without much change to their daily life, I think is a big one. And by doing that, it'll actually make it easier for folks like us as the haulers and processors, because if we make it simple and convenient and easy, then the loads are not going to be contaminated, and it's going to be good quality material that we can process, and then therefore good quality compost that we can sell and distribute locally. I'll touch again on the education and outreach. And I did mention CET quickly in the Master Cycle program. I think that you guys deserve a bigger shout out here. They've been very helpful in our business, huge to us growing. And I know that's there. I do think we need more of that. As I mentioned before, my role in Bennington County is something that we can try to model. I think connecting with the boards of health, the Department of Public Works, again, my role in the Northern Berkshire Solid Waste Management District, I got on there and I was surprised at how little people that are in these positions of waste management don't even know about composting. They should. And lastly, back to the zoning and regulatory. I will say MassDEP does make it very simple for the general permit, which is what we get. Like it's not a hard thing to do. It's really simplified, and I'm very, very thankful for that. So in order to get permitted through DEP is easy. I don't want to make it sound like it's not easy, but it's not a hard process, right? You guys make it accessible, and for people that want to do it, don't know much about it, it's not that hard a thing to do. But I do think the agricultural definition is a big one. What the zoning issues, and I know that's not necessarily DEP's thing, but how do we do that? Like, I have a couple real world examples. Like first town I was in, the land had just become industrial, so it was easy to get permitted. But still, the town didn't know anything about it. They had no idea what composting was. I tried to get permitted in one town, or I was looking towards it, and they told me they don't allow any waste in and out of the town. And what does that even mean? Like, we're not hauling waste, right? We're hauling a resource. Meanwhile, this town has junkyards and scrap metal everywhere at different locations. So the common sense to that is, it just didn't make any sense. This is an agricultural thing too, but like right to farm communities. Like we live in a right to farm community. Our facility is in a right to farm community. That doesn't mean we can have a composting site there. It should. That's a big part of the agricultural thing. Um, I go into these zoning meetings and I have to explain to the folks what composting is, and they have nothing on the books about it. So I think connecting directly with the town administrators, things like that, to kind of and understand what it is first. I think that's a big part. Understand what it is first so that when we go to them, we say, here's what it is. You don't have to be worried. This is a very simple process. And one other thing I'll bring up quickly is another real world example. We wanted to move to a new location or expand to a new location at a farm, and we're going through the process, and we had a current grant out through MassDEP that we were fulfilling, and we couldn't move because the grant is fulfilled through DEP, and this area had an APR, agricultural preservation restriction. It was a great piece of land. The people that owned it wanted to work with me. They were really hyped about it, but we couldn't move there because I would have lost out on the funding through DEP because the APR wouldn't let us in there. And that to me is just, like, again, if we're not agricultural, then I don't know what is. So those are my big ones. Appreciate it.
Hey, Tom, one other question that came up earlier. Just wanted to ask your perspective, and I'll ask Andrew about this in a minute too. But any issue or limitation is getting carbon material a limiting factor for you, or has it been, or do you expect it to be?
It can be tough. I mean, that's one thing that I go to bed at night, and that's one thing I'm always worried about is having enough carbon. We've been fortunate to have just enough. We've gotten close to uh running out by the end of winter, and then summer comes, and then we're doing good. But as we continue to grow, I know that's going to be something. And a lot of that has just been my constant hard work of getting a hold of every truck I see in the area, giving my card, having a convenient location for them to dump. Like it's just been nonstop work. But there are sources locally. There's a farm locally, a composter locally that has, I wouldn't say endless, but he has a lot of material. And if I ever need it, I can purchase it from him, and have it brought in. And the material's there. I work with a transfer station and they're sending off grindings. And I'm like, why are you sending that off? Like, we can use that, right? So, again, that's connecting the people, and that saves them money. They don't have to ship it off very far, or they can keep it right on site and we can use it. So, but yes, carbon is always a worry for me, having enough.
Okay, thank you. And turn to Brian next, and little bit different perspective, both being out of state, but also operating kind of a multi-faceted facility. So, Brian, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think John said it very well. There's a lot of local dynamics and a lot of local, what we call sort of cultural change and shift and education that has to take place to just and then we continue to do this in our industry. We're always educating consumers, customers, residents, regulatory folks, legislators on what it is we do in our businesses to divert food waste. So I think you did a really good job talking about the local dynamics. Just on one note, if there's ever a carbon need amongst the group here, we're running trucks for green waste and carbon-rich materials all around through the Massachusetts corridor. So happy to talk to folks to support them if carbon is a need in the future. I think two things stand out to me, John. I think Andrew mentioned before that setting a clear signal to the marketplace. I think it's one thing that Mass did do well is, this diversion program has been in place for over a decade, and that's allowed collections, education, and capacity and processing to slowly follow. I think if the goal is to get to the curb and do more residential collection, then I think lowering or virtually eliminating the commercial threshold and doing that a phased approach, I think is a very good market signal to send to companies and individuals looking to expand collection, expand composting, processing, digestion, what have you. I think that's obviously MassDEP has been exploring that direction, and I think for our standpoint, phasing that in over time just is a good way to signal to the market that there's real intention there. I think the second thing that I would say is that we're always looking for strength in end markets. So, we make a tremendous amount of compost from our operation, and to the extent that the state is interested in strengthening procurement requirements or preferencing compost for use in public landscaping or DOT projects, soil restoration work, ag, stormwater work. I just think the more that we can, as communities, continue to bolster reuse and beneficial reuse of the materials we're generating, just helps to create that end market and that that marketplace that is more thriving for us to sell our materials into. So I think that's a big factor for us, both on the bulk side and the bag side, just creating more awareness and more marketplace availability or opportunity for these products. So those are the two things that I would say.
Okay, thanks. And next, I'll go to Andrew. And Andrew, just in addition to this question in general, if you have any thoughts about, the sourcing and availability of carbon material along with food waste, feel free to weigh in on that also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna provide a counter to what Brian said. So if the state and DOT end up with programs that encourage purchasing of compost, that will actually go against the state's food waste goals, because it will discourage food waste composting and it will encourage regular old yard waste composting. So if the state thinks they want to help compost and food waste composting out, they need to specify that they're going to buy food waste compost. And there is a mechanism to do that. State DOT REA certified compost, and with a STA certified compost with food scraps listed as an ingredient. So that will actually increase demand for food waste compost. And that gets up because we are actually we are in competition for the carbon with the yard waste composters. So that's a no. Can we get carbon? Yes. Will it become increasingly harder? Sure. But we can get it right now. So that answers that question. And I'm going to preface my response to your question number 2 is that I do think digesters should be part of the system, They're good for packaged food, which maybe that should be going to animal feed, but they're good for liquids. And they do a lot of capacity. However, my concern is that on the track we're at, they're threatening to take all the food waste. And that's the dynamic I want to explore. And I'm going to bring up this story real quick. So there's a grocery store in our town. We're going to call it Jerry's Grocery, and it's in the same town as our compost site. So we could go pick up from Jerry's for, I'm going to use a random number, $10 per tote. So that means every time we flip a 64-gallon tote of food waste into our truck, we charge them $10. And we would drive that 5 minutes to the compost site to get fully recycled into plant food compost. Now, what's happening is another hauler who goes to a digester undercut us and is picking up for $7 a tote, right? And they are driving it 2.5 hours south to Rhode Island, to the Rhode Island bioenergy facility, right? So 5-minute drive to get composted, or 2.5 hour drive at a lower price somehow to the digester. And what does the digester do? They make a small amount of energy, like real little amount, and then the nutrients they discharge to the Narragansett wastewater treatment plant to be disposed of, right? So the current market dynamics allow that to happen. And it's 5 minutes down the road to get recycled, or 2.5 hours down the road to get disposed of. Now, I see that as getting worse because, so how does that happen? Well, there's energy subsidies on the back end of the digester, right? That is those are like increasing those subsidies that they get for energy. And that's because of the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's because of America First policies that promote domestic production. It's because of EPA's enhanced fuel renewable fuel program, which just came out with a really high payment for these digesters for making gas. And it's Mass Senate Bill 3143, Section 160, which is going to help them sell the gas at even a higher price. And, it might sound good, but the problem is it's a completely different industry, the energy industry, dictated what's happening in the organic waste industry. Purpose is to recycle atoms of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, etc. Right? Purpose of organic waste recycling is not to burn it. That's like the last thing you do. There's no recycling system that does burning. So it's risky for MassDEP to rely on this energy market, which is volatile, changing, driven by ESG goals, and it's global, right? Canada's policies influence what's happening at the Rhode Island bioenergy facility. So MassDEP needs to figure out how to level out the playing field, right? Because if you look at your numbers, like, digestion's dominating, and if you guys are race to 780,000 tons by 2030 and you don't do anything, digesters are going to dominate. So potential solutions, one is the promoting the purchasing of compost on the back end, but it has to be food scrap compost, because if you just do any compost, it's going to go the wrong way. Another solution is you should tax the haulers that bring the digesters. Tax them $20 per ton of food waste that's collected in mass, that goes to a digester, right? And that money goes to the infrastructure for the higher and better uses on the table, right? Food donation, animal feed, composting. Like, that's a way to level the playing field, because that's the tip fee at the digester is the point at which allows the haulers to undercut us. And I don't think it's crazy, because I think digesters are more similar to, an incinerator than anything else. And you guys tax the incinerators for the same thing. The other solution, just spitballing here, is you could prevent residential material from going to depackagers, right? Similar to what Vermont did. They're banning source separated organics from going into depackagers. You could say we don't want residential material going into depackagers, and that would keep it for its highest and best use, which is composting. So that's one mechanism. And I'm going to wrap up. The one mechanism that allows digesters to outcompete composters is that price per tote, right? And the second mechanism that feeds into humanity's worst characteristic, laziness, is that the haulers who go to digesters are out there actively telling the generators, the restaurants, the grocery stores, go ahead and throw plastic in. Don't worry about it. We have a magic machine back at our facility that separates it all out. So now the generator gets bad training, and they're now throwing trash in, and you can't unscramble that egg. Once the generators, the grocery stores, the restaurants are all throwing plastic in, you've locked composters out of the market. And we can never go and collect that stuff because it's too trashy. So we can collect material with trash. We're designed to do that. We assume trash is going to come in. We can handle it at Black Earth. But the way things are going with this dynamic with the haulers is we're going to get locked out because it's going to get too trashy. So you have to enforce source separation rules and, maybe go the Vermont route too. But that might be too extreme. So those are the two dynamics, right? Energy industry subsidies and this like throw it all in policy that is really needs to be addressed by MassDEP. Because if you do nothing, you're just going to get more depacks and digesters, and you're not going to get compost sites.
Okay, thank you. I think out of those points, I think the better option there is taking a harder look at source separation and whether materials are being source separated. We actually don't have any per ton fees, even on solid waste disposal. And I think if we were to do any kind of fee, I think it would be a per ton fee on solid waste disposal, and that doesn't exist in any form at this point in Massachusetts. So I think, but I do think, it's important to hold the line that materials that are going to any organics processing facility, whether it's a general permit or an RCC permit, it's, those permits are all contingent on those materials being source separated. Yes, packaged food material is allowed, but it should be generally source separated material. So I think that's something important to think about as we move forward, to make sure it's legitimately source separated material and not tending towards looking more like solid waste, in which case that becomes a solid waste facility, not a general permit or RCC facility. So I think we need to, make sure that's happening in the marketplace. Let me see. I think I just did not get to Vanguard, and I think if I understood this right, Kip had to leave for another call, but I think Billy, you're with us from Vanguard, I believe.
Hey, John, this is Chris.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if I might be able to go real quickly, just because I want to address some of the points that were just raised. If for anyone who has a chance to look at the slides afterwards, I think the slides that Divert provided do a good job of highlighting some of the concerns that were just raised by Andrew. I just want to clarify. I think there was some statement was made that to sort of try to tie digestion to incineration, or suggest that food is being burned. And if anyone has a chance to go back to our slides, I just want to point out that when you look at the incoming weight of food that comes into our facilities, just on a weight basis alone, only 5% of that actually goes to renewable natural gas. 66% of it is water that's recovered. 11% of it is soil amendment. 3% of it is fertilizer, and the most of the rest of it is water. And so we're actually, when you look at digestion solutions, you're actually able to recover quite a bit of it, and it is highly circular in nature. So this notion that you're taking the food and burning it or equating it to incineration, I just want to make sure we clarify and dispel any of those concerns right away. In fact, if you look at the next slide, John, there's actually a net benefit when you do digestion, because you're creating so much soil amendment, you're recovering so much water, you're creating so much energy. And again, digestion, as I said in the chat, this isn't meant to be a panacea. I fully believe that curbside composting programs should service most of the organics that are diverted in the state. But when you look at some of the programs where when they do go to curbside collection, you actually do consume a lot of energy and you consume a lot of water. And so when you're dealing with wet, messy, commercially generated food, there is a net benefit, and it is quite circular when you look at the amount of organic material that's recovered and able to be reinvested into our farming systems through solid digestate and liquid fertilizer, the amount of water that's recovered and able to be reintroduced into our food supply. That's a pretty significant component of what is incoming, versus this notion that it's all just being burned right off of the bat.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I think their facility that they had on the South Shore discharged to a wastewater treatment plant, and the liquid is where most of the nutrients are. And like digesters like to talk about the solids growing back on the land, but it's really a small percent of the nutrients go back there. And I don't know what you do in other parts of the country, but I think you got to look at it from like a per ton nitrogen, per ton phosphorus, per ton potassium basis. Like, are you recycling that?
Yeah, I don't know that we'd be able to sell our liquid fertilizer if it wasn't high in nutrients. And so, obviously there's lots of technologies out there, and, we can get into, comparing notes on that perhaps in a different forum. But I just wanted to just quickly clarify that, there's not there, and dispel, this notion that the food that's being collected is being burned, or the material that's being accepted is just, full of trash. If you look at the prior slide, with 100 pounds of incoming food waste to a retail location, this is source separated food. But it does come in packaging in some cases. And in some cases, packaging is really hard to hand source separate. And so when you look at the amount of material that's collected that's inorganic, the depackaging operation can remove a significant portion of it. But it's not trash. If you look at it overall, it does make up a pretty small percentage of this incoming food waste amount, because it is source separated. But if you don't have the mechanical depackaging process in place, or a very robust hand separation in place, then you will result in the end product will be contaminated. And so that's why it's important to have either a really good manual hand separation in place to get what the stores or other sources can't get to through their own source separation practices, or to have a mechanical process in place as well.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification in both perspectives there. Let me turn now to Billy. I think Billy, you're with us now from Vanguard. Is that right?
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. So if you want to weigh in on this from Vanguard's perspective.
I think I think, again, to reiterate what everyone else has said, MassDEP has done a really good job and has really been a leader for other states. I know, as I've worked across the country and I meet with legislators, they do talk about what we've done in Massachusetts and some of what's happened in Vermont as being leaders in this, especially in organic waste diversion. And for me, I think one of the most important actions we can take is that it's really hard to enforce these kinds of laws because it gets dropped off at a I'm sorry, just slipped my mind. It gets dropped off at a plant, and one of the regulators is there looking. Is that a half ton? Is that a full? Like, how do you know exactly what it is? I mean, it's really sort of complicated in that sense. So I do think that that's a challenge, and it's something we've always felt with some of our partners is that there could be more diversion if there was, I don't want to say better, but if there was a more robust system to understand how much organic waste is actually going to a landfill rather than to a composter or to a digester or a depack facility. So for me, that's one of the things that I focused on a lot since I've joined this industry.
And Billy, one other kind of follow-up question for you, not to put you on the spot. I don't need like a specific response, but I know you had at one point you had paused operation of your AD facility in Haverhill, and I think that was partly a question of trying to matter material sourcing, but just any I don't need like a specific answer about that facility, but just kind of in general, like where you see that going forward in terms of, capacity utilization, being able to utilize the full capacity out there, that kind of issue in general.
So I do think that there is a lot of capacity in the Commonwealth. One of the reasons, we have some older digesters in New England, and we are in the process of doing a lot of upgrades here on our projects from what we've learned as we've expanded across the country. So I do think there's opportunity. There's enough to go around into, what Brian said. What Chris was talking about. It's not a panacea. We need everything. We cannot solve the organic waste issue without everyone, without composters, without what we do, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna open things up as best we can here. I know we got a lot of comments in the chat, but I also see two hands raised. I'm not sure who was first, but I'll do the raised hands first. I see Andrew on top of my list. So Andrew Horowitz, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question or comment. Oh, you're still muted.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
All right. First, thanks for the invitation to the meeting. I'm Andrew Horowitz with AgriLab Technologies. We're a compost aeration and heat recovery manufacturer. I'm extremely interested in this space because even though I'm new at compost, I'm not new to ag. And I've spent the last decade or so working in a very similar industry, which was the high-tech greenhouse business. Basically, when I was working for Little Leaf Farms, a lot of similar companies, I ran into a very similar program where how do you lead the development of new innovative technologies that we need when you're facing sort of these antiquated zoning laws? And in their case, it was even one step further. They needed farmland that had enough utilities to power a data center. But when you have this sort of mismatch of incentives, especially on the energy side, I feel like you often can get a push in sort of the wrong direction. I'd worked with California extensively on rolling back part of their energy code. Had done it in Massachusetts with Right to Farm. To me, having been here about 6 months now, seems like one of the biggest hindrances to development is either expanding permits on current land because of odor and sort of neighbor complaints, or people just have an antiquated idea of compost as the process. But it seems like the accessibility of land where the waste is actually being generated is a real hindrance. And I don't think compost is the only solution. I think it will supplement, not supplant digestion. Right now, just looking at the numbers, we're so heavily skewed towards AD that it feels like a system waiting to collapse. And as I look at the maples they're taking down in my front yard right now and all the dying trees, I fear, unfortunately, we probably won't have a shortage of carbon in the near term with the droughts that we're having. But I don't see there being any way to develop the infrastructure we need, especially the distributed infrastructure to handle food waste in particular, without easing up the zoning and including compost as part of an agricultural activity. And that might be municipalities being able to take on meat and food waste that they could not because they did not have the process or the control. That might be streamlining the zoning for land use purchase. Because even if they run as a commercial business, if you can't buy an ag priced land, you're never going to compete with a condo with the Communities Act. I mean, it's just never, ever, ever going to happen. And so a lot of really good points on both sides here. I think we're all here because we want to be part of the solution. So, that's my 2 cents. And again, just appreciate the time.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And then Phil?
Hello, everyone. Phil Goddard, Town of Bourne. For those who don't know, we run a integrated facility down on Cape Cod. We have a modern double-line landfill, 3 transfer stations, 1 C&D, 1 single stream, residential drop-off transfer station, and then a compost site. We had a 25-year site lease with Harvest Power 14 years ago to do a digester. So we were a leader in that regard, and that was the preferred option back in that day with master planning at the DEP. That failed because of trying to sell the power, power purchase price. So there's challenges in all of these. So now we have pivoted. We don't have the room on the site. That failed. They withdrew. We are now supporting the regional composting site on the military base at Joint Base Cape Cod with the Barnstable County and the Upper Cape communities. So I want to zoom out, John. There's a really great discussion. I think you do well to, obviously, you're going to go through your staff and go through a lot of this in detail. But I've said this repeatedly. I'll just zoom back out. DP needs to think like a developer. You need to put yourself in the place of each of these sectors, each of these technologies, each of these solutions. Write a flow chart. If you were to go out and get a loan, site a facility, operate it, compete in the open marketplace against, others that want to do different things, finding your niche, put that all in a flow chart with permitting, grants that you could help, but also this is a sort of a larger trend. The EEA generally, the Secretariat, I would urge you in the most strong way I can for all the Secretariat departments to get together on these issues. DAR, DOER, DPU, DEP, DCR, looking at available land that could be leased out, like at the MRF out in Springfield. The land puts up 5 acres on a 5,000 acre park, and then you put out the bid to have somebody come in. Siting is enormously challenging. In terms of the co-collection, I think we ran into this with MSW and single stream at haulers were going in and offering, oh, we don't do recycling trash only. People were throwing trash, recyclables in the trash. Boards of health, for those of you who don't know, control the local permits. So they can require that the haulers do offer recycling service. I can't remember, John, if there was a state law passed or not to require that both be offered on contracts or not, but
No.
that's a problem. And if you have people going in, so generally I would take a spreadsheet with the gap, the 270,000 tons. I would really analyze the 50,000 of composting that went away and why. The failures of AD, some projects, the misconceptions, all of these things, but kind of put it in a big spreadsheet geographically in tons, look at the players, and then do those flow charts all the way through permitting, so that we can have you can really have a realistic understanding. And the last sector that's missing here is the small businesses that are very afraid. You've heard it in the last call, Maria Leva from the Cape Cod, Upper Cape Canal Area Chamber of Commerce. They're like, all the restaurants in the Cape, they're going to get a notice one day says, hey, guess what? Next week, next month, 6 months from now, you got to divert all your food waste in the middle of summer. And going, what? And they're really going to figure out how they're going to do it with their costs. So I would urge you to do a lot of reach out to if this goes full zero threshold, all those small businesses, the schools, there are many people that are not complying. So I'm happy to help with that, but I would really urge you to kind of the interdepartmental coordination. You heard that with DAR, cross purposes. I would do with OSD and procurement. DOT needs to be at the table for buying the materials. So that synergistic approach was something I'd really urge you to do, including the embedded carbon folks that want to do stuff like the bridge project down here. So I say that again, but you heard a lot of great discussion. There's some competing technologies, a little tension there. I think there's room for all of them, but market forces are going to dictate one or the other. And it's very hard to site a compost facility. A digesters in a building may be a little simpler to control the odors and such. So I hope that helps. I'm happy to work on those things with you, but I think it's going to give you a bigger picture and help the developers on this call. I would urge you to have maybe deeper conversations offline with each of them to get that really down so that they can show you the flow chart and how their business models work so you can understand that. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Phil. Just to comment on process and outreach. Yeah, absolutely. There's a need for a lot of outreach and engagement to the small business community. I've been working to try to do that on the side. We need to work a lot with schools. We're certainly going to have more discussions focused on those entities later in this process. But as in the case with our work on previous bans, we always, the organic subcommittee is not the extent of our stakeholder engagement. We're always trying to reach out to groups outside of this, and that's kind of if you haven't heard me say this before, our kind of mantra going through this process is we'll meet with anybody over pretty much any time. I generally mean that with some exceptions, but pretty much, I'll go to other organizations' meetings. I'll go speak to large groups, small groups, whoever has questions or, comments, concerns around the work we're doing. We want to hear about it. We always want to try to get those perspectives to the table before we move forward with any kind of regulatory proposals to make sure that we're addressing those concerns up front. We go forward with a solution that's going to work for everybody. Certainly part of the infrastructure part of it, but just want to flag that there's a lot more conversations to happen with other stakeholders as well. Let me turn to Rob and see if Rob, you might be able to help me here. I know there's a lot of questions and comments that have come through in the chat. Would you be able to kind of help us? I know we're not going to get to everything on this call, but maybe if you can help me kind of pull out a few of those that we can try to address in the next 30 minutes or so.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot that came in. I think I'll start with the kind of more straightforward ones and try to get through as many as we can. Maybe even got time open up for people to ask questions. But there was a couple questions and discussion in the chat around digesters taking in sewage sludge and also leakage of gas and methane. So I know there was some discussion. I don't know if anyone wanted to maybe add to that or answer those questions directly.
Yeah, so I think that would be potentially for Billy, for Chris, or possibly for Brian. And sorry, what was you mentioned the sewage sludge. I think I'm pretty clear that none of these entities are taking in sewage sludge. But what was the second part of the question or the other question?
The other one was talking about methane capture. So there's a couple different questions around this methane capture and monitoring gas leakage along those lines.
And just the one other point about wastewater residuals, there is one wastewater treatment plant that takes in slurry food material as part of its existing anaerobic digester process. So that's not so much an AD facility adding wastewater residuals, but a wastewater treatment plant that's taking in slurry food waste to supplement the process, boost their gas generation, generate energy to run their facility. So there is one facility like that. The other AD facilities don't take wastewater treatment plant residuals. But let me turn, maybe call on you guys in turn and add to this, and maybe the gas collection, the gas management comment too. Maybe we can start with Billy from Vanguard.
Sure. I'm not the expert on this, but I do know that there's always going to be I'm sure there's some that gets out there. It's one of the things that comes back to us, especially when you go directly into the pipeline. One of the complaints that you often hear is that pipelines are old. They sometimes leak. We do our best to ensure that we're capturing the gas because that's what our business is based on. And here in the Commonwealth, that is upgraded on site and combusted to become renewable electricity, pardon me. That's not my wheelhouse, but I feel good about it, of what we're doing. Chris can probably speak more eloquently than I can on it.
Sure, Billy. I'll just add, I mentioned in the chat, we're not incentivized in any way to allow any methane to escape because, Billy, we're financially incentivized to capture all that. And there's a reason why those digesters have extremely robust covers on top of them. And if you ever get a chance to tour one of our digesters, you can go up there and see for yourself. This is a very different type of operation than other types of organics processing that does so in open fields or no closed containment and anything like that. The food that's processed and put into the digester is completely contained because it has to be contained. The air quality permitting agencies that permit these facilities, they're very serious about this, and we go through very robust permitting processes to make sure that the systems are designed to capture every bit of methane that is generated. There are also backup systems in place for these. So, for example, if there was some sort of incident at a facility, or if the whole region lost power or anything like that, if for some reason we had to take down the system for a day or two to do maintenance, all these rare instances require the methane to then be flared. So you're effectively destroying the methane. You're destroying the part of it which would be harmful to the atmosphere, which is why none of us want methane in the atmosphere. And so we have, the backup mechanism is in place to flare it and destroy it. It's in our best interest to never flare it and to never have to destroy it because we want it to serve hard to electrify industries that still have a need for combustible gas. Even in environments where we're trying to minimize the use of natural gas, there still is a need for combustible gas. There's a reason why in one of the states we opened a facility in, we had a state representative who was chair of the Environment and Energy Committee who had just passed a bill to ban new natural gas connections in the state where we were opening this facility. She attended our ribbon cutting, or excuse me, our groundbreaking event for our facility because she very much believed that there still needs to be some combustible gas solutions in place to serve hard to electrify industries. And this represented a good solution for those types of heavy manufacturing industries that still need access to renewable natural gas. So in summary, really just, some of the strictest environmentalists, who have gone out of their way to ban new natural gas, for those same concerns, have been very supportive of facilities like Diverts, because they see the value add in trying to do what we do.
Thanks. Let me see, Brian, anything you want to add on this question?
No, I'll echo Chris's comments. I mean, there's no incentive to create fugitive releases of methane in and around the facilities. And I'll take it a step further. In Connecticut, we are regulated and tested against fugitive methane emissions and leaks in our facilities. Connecticut DEP has a detection system that every year gets driven through our facility to measure and monitor methane. So I think going back to the fact that these facilities are highly regulated. Look, they've been built in regulated environments, and state regulators and frankly the citizens that occupy the communities where we're building these pieces of infrastructure demand that they are managed well. And for us specifically in Connecticut, the power or the gas we generate is converted to power on site, and that power is distributed to the local community where we're powering the police station, fire station, wastewater plants, and the municipal building, and doing so at a reduced rate for the people within our community. So tremendous benefit, as Chris noted, creating power for near edge or for behind the meter applications, which is all very valuable, particularly in an environment in our region where utility rates are largely unchecked and growing.
Thanks. Rob, do you have another question to pull out?
Sure. Before I move on, I thought I saw somebody's hand raised, but now I don't know if somebody had their hand up before and put it down if they wanted to speak or not. Before we move on. One last chance. All right. There was a question, are there municipal policy ideas that encourage residents to increase food waste recovery behavior?
Sure, I'll take that. I think the best mechanism right now is the pilot program. So it's where a town will say, we will pay for the first 500 or 1,000 households that join the pilot for food waste collection. And that's great because it gets you the density to get through the town cost efficiently. And it gets people participating and educated. And those people who join are generally your compost advocates. So it's good to get them in because they're going to produce the most food waste. So you get the highest diversion. And they're the most likely to tell the next neighbor, hey, you should do this. So the town starts a pilot, they run it for 2 years. And then what you see is when the pilot ends and it switches to private pay, at least half to 75% of the people stay on board. And so now for a one-time cost of a 2-year pilot, you've now started a program with density that gets our trucks driving through the town. And now we can stop downtown and pick up the restaurants and other small, generators. So that's been the most effective municipal policy that we've seen.
Just also a note on MassDEP grant and assistance programs in this area. So we do provide grants in a couple of different ways to municipalities to support food waste collection and diversion through our what we call our Sustainable Materials Recovery Program. That includes grants for certain types of equipment, whether it be a composting site development or collection carts. We also support school programs through our School Green Team program, and then also through our Sustainable Materials Recovery Program. We the biggest grant within that program is called the Recycling Dividends Program. Quickly, the way that works is that we establish program activities that each have a certain number of points associated with them, and each point has an associated dollar value based on the size of a community. Municipalities that implement those program criteria receive grant payments based on the number of programs and the number of points they earn and their per point dollar value. And those payments then they can turn around and reinvest in program implementation, including food waste programs, but other recycling and waste reduction initiatives as well. And those are big drivers to try to support and grow programs on the municipal level. There's more to that, but it's just a real quick summary. Let me, Andrew, I saw you had your hand up, but let me just go to John on this question, and then we can go to you, Andrew.
I was actually going to mention the RDP program that you just mentioned. So I think that's important. It's one piece of knowledge for those towns, the municipalities, the boards to understand why this is important and give them some incentive to do some of it. Maybe more things specific to food waste itself. I know there's approved spending categories on there, and I think improving or expanding that could definitely help because some of the towns take advantage of it, but I mean, some of the towns on our boards don't even really utilize it. So at least for composting.
Andrew Horowitz.
Yeah, I just wanted to float, remembered my question from before. So it was about sort of having a unified front around the composting side. And I know there's the U.S. Composting Council. I'm relatively new to the space, and I know Vermont has their own agency. It looks like, from the way I see it, it seems like most New England and Northeast states don't have their own organization because it's already been covered. I think the U.S. Composting Council didn't start creating state chapters until about 2020. And so, our laws were on the books 6 years before that at a minimum. But I'm wondering if part of the follow-up to this, if the DEP would be willing to just help sort of post an inquiry, whether on the email distribution list, to see if there were groups or individuals that would be interested in starting either a state by state or potentially even a regional, sharing of information. I think how fractionated right now this industry is and how many different voices are working on the same thing, when there's good practices that we can pick up from a lot of our neighbors. And, in general, I think a rising tide lifts all ships. So if that was something that might be necessary, would appreciate your help just with at least asking that initial question and getting the ball rolling.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. Thank you. John, did you have something on that?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Actually, at the last Master Cycle conference I was at, I kind of had that thought that Andrew brought up. I said to myself, we need to have something specifically for food waste here. I mean, recycling is great, but it's such a broad term. It's so many different things. And yeah, the food waste sector is in there, but it would be nice to have something statewide or even bigger. I think statewide would be important, just statewide, but in a bigger sense, to have something to bring all those people together, and have these conversations regularly in a bigger forum.
Okay, thanks. I know we have a bunch more questions that we're not going to get to. So what I'm going to do is we'll go back through the chat after we complete the call here, and any questions that we have not addressed, we'll take a look at those. We'll raise those with our panelists and get some thoughts on those additional questions, and compile that as part of the meeting summary we post. So we'll take a crack at getting through all the questions and comments subsequent to the meeting. I think what I want to do in the last few minutes here is ask each of our panelists to do kind of their own wrap-up comment. And it's going to be hard, but I'm going to ask you to literally try to limit it to about 60 to 90 seconds each, because I have a couple things I want to cover with next steps right at the end here. So real quick final thoughts. I'll call on each of you and go around, and just anything that either you didn't get a chance to say or anything that you did say but you want to emphasize as kind of a take-home message. So let me go to Laxmi first.
Thank you for allowing us to be part of this discussion. We're the only food to feed participants on this panel. And so, I know a lot of the discussion has not been about food to feed, but, just want to raise the awareness that we exist in Massachusetts, that we are a viable option. And for anyone on the panel that, feels like they want to drop off food at Oxford, that we're a better option for that material, please reach out. We want to work with you. The one thing that we did not bring, or that I did not bring up is, that we could help with, the MassDEP could help on is illegal dumping of food direct to farms. We know that is happening, and so that deters from kind of what we are doing. So, maybe a little bit of attention to that, John. And we can talk offline in more detail. But
Okay.
thank you again for allowing us to be part of this. And we're excited about the future ahead for Massachusetts.
Great, thank you. And then Billy from Vanguard.
Sure. I would echo that thank you for having this space to have this discussion, because I think it's really needed everywhere. Food waste is my pet peeve, and we waste too much food in the United States. I would say my final thought, though, is really this, is that there is enough room for all of us, and we need every kind of business to fight food waste, to get it into those that are hungry, to food to feed, to composting, to digestion. I think there's room for everybody, and I think that we're stronger together. Was that 60 seconds?
I think so. I don't have a second timer going, but just trying to keep it quick. Okay, let me go to Andrew next.
Okie dokie. So, I hear the digesters say we need everyone, and I agree with that. But the reality of the mechanisms at play is we might end up with only digesters. Like myself, John, we're like some of the only dummies out here building new compost facilities. It's risky, right? And whereas like private equity is piled into digestion because it's lucrative. Like, and people like us are like taking a huge risk. And at the end of the day, this is about like organic waste management is its own industry, energy industry, totally separate. Their needs should come separate. We are recycling nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. All right, back to grow new food. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to make our country better. And it can make Massachusetts stronger. Make healthy soil, make healthy people. And has anyone considered the reduction in healthcare costs if we could grow food around Boston and feed it to people like vegetables? Like the digestion, they contribute right now. So they take in 400,000 tons of food waste, just about. They contribute 0.02% to the ISO New England power grid. It's almost nothing. And if it goes to wastewater treatment plant, it's just disposal. So MassDEP needs to figure out an actual financial mechanism that levels the playing field, because otherwise Massachusetts infrastructure is going to get determined by global energy policy, national energy policy, the whims and volatility there. Like if MassDEP wants a strong state and they want compost and they want animal feed and they want food donation, you need to do something.
Let me go next to Brian.
Yeah, thanks, John. Andrew and I are gonna grab a beer sometime, and I'm gonna let them know we're not all that scary on the digestion side of the equation. I think I'll emulate Billy's comments. I think there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us. We're all taking a lot of risk in a lot of different ways in order to run our businesses. The cost of building anaerobic digestion grew 30% over the past year. Frankly, there's a lot of risk associated with running these facilities. So, hats off to the folks who are running these plants. Hats off to the folks who are running compost facilities, running collection routes. This is a tough business. We are definitely climbing a hill, but I do think we're in the second or third inning of a very exciting time in our culture, in our society, particularly Massachusetts. And I know that I'm just very proud to be part of this team, in this group, in this industry, for the folks who are trying to charge that hill and make a difference. So I appreciate the forum today and talking about this important topic.
Let me do Chris. Is he still with us? All right, try for Chris again in a minute. Let me go to John.
John, did you call on me? I'm sorry.
Yes, I did.
I am having all kinds of internet issues today. Started at the outside of my presentation. I'm gonna just go off video and do my comments because everyone froze for a minute. I just want to echo Brian and Billy. This isn't an either or situation. I think there's room for everyone at the table. I've said it, I think, pretty clearly. Digestion is not the panacea. We don't want to be or intend to be the panacea. We believe that we can go after, and we've been able to serve these very small niche markets quite well. These are food companies that have heavily packaged, um, very, isolated quantities of food only. And so they're not generating food such that it can be mixed in with yard waste and make an optimal solution for a compost. These are food companies that have material that many times composters are telling us they don't want that kind of material because it would compromise their own systems. And when we make digestate out of that material, we then give that to composters. So there is value there and there is circularity there because that material goes to composters. Furthermore, the material that we are able to receive is additive. It's not something that comes at the expense of other organics providers or processors. So when we get grocery stores, for example, to take on our digestion solution, which has depackaging, the data instantly tells us that they're increasing the amount that they were diverting from the landfill 2 to 4 times. So what that tells us is that there's a whole subset of materials and products that were never ever going to composting. They were simply being put in the trash compactor because they were way too hard to process. They were too hard to depackage. They were too hard. They weren't ever going to be beneficial for use in a typical curbside program. And so the data shows us that when we enter the discussion and we're able to serve some of these large food companies, they're able to add to the amount of material that would be diverted from the landfill, would have otherwise gone to the landfill. So I just want to really emphasize there's room at the table for everyone. We think we can supplement the existing curbside system quite well, and we can do it in a way that doesn't detract from them because we're just identifying more and more food that just by our own data and the data from these stores was absolutely going in their trash compactors and going to the landfill.
Great, thank you. And then we'll close with John. I don't believe I called on you yet.
Sure. I think very quickly here, education is part, and I think something Andrew mentioned to me a long time ago I thought was very important, is education starting with the youngest folks possible because they're going to bring that up to their younger siblings. They're going to bring it up the school system. By the time they get to high school, they're going to be teaching everybody else. Another big point here, I think if we look at nature, nature has been composting since the dawn of time, right? Like trees fall in the forest, food falls, animals eat it, things pass away. That top inch of soil is compost built over thousands and thousands of years. It's the reason all of us are here, right? The interaction between the sun and the compost that's in the soil naturally. So our system, we're much bigger than living in the woods, obviously. We got these blockades up. We need to get those blockades down and create this circular system because all the life on the planet comes from that. We are that. We're while we're alive, we'll be compost after we pass. So I think it's a beautiful process that I'm glad to be part of, and thank you all for being a part of it with me.
Great, thanks very much. So I want to kind of close here with some next steps. First of all, I want to thank all of our panelists here today who took time out of their day to join us and share their perspectives. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the thoughts and the information sharing, and I think we got a lot of thoughts on this call to digest, so to speak. So we'll be putting all that together post call here, going through all the chat that we didn't get a chance to adequately address and following up on that. Then we also will be continuing our meetings on other defined topics and issues going forward. Some of the other aspects of the food waste system that we need to be talking about to advance our progress. And there'll be more coming on that. I expect the next one of those actual meetings will be in September. As I mentioned at the beginning, July and August meetings are challenging. So we'll be kind of working both to take things away from our first three meetings over the course of the next couple of months, and then to begin to plan those upcoming discussions as well to get things going again in the fall. All of that's going to be going towards developing the document that's kind of our guiding document for food waste, what we call our Organics Action Plan. We've developed an updated Organics Action Plan surrounding kind of each stage of our food waste programs development, around our initial food waste ban, around the expanded ban, and now thinking about how we attack the food waste from small businesses and residents. And my point, I think I'll close on, is that I see the true competitor here and the real waste that we're trying to stop is the food waste going to solid waste disposal, whether it's a landfill or it's a municipal waste combustion facility. And I guess unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, if you want to take an opportunities lens, there's still about 1 million tons per year of that material from Massachusetts sources going into the trash each year. So remains a huge problem. And, but the flip side of that problem is there's a lot of food waste to get. The getting part is the hard part. Getting it out of the trash, getting it to where we want it to go is a challenge, but also an opportunity. So that's what we'll be continuing to talk about. I believe I put my email address here. Yep. So my one other closing thought is if you're not already on our organic subcommittee email list and you want to stay in the loop in these discussions going forward, please email me and I will add you to that list. Or if you have a colleague or anyone else who you want to get engaged, please share my contact information and we'll make sure we get them added to that list and so that you can stay updated going forward. And then one other thing, I'll echo what I said earlier. We know there needs to be a lot of discussion around all these issues to really move forward effectively, and the organic subcommittee meetings are a really important way to do that. But I'm also always interested in going out and speaking to other groups about our work in the food waste space. So if you have other groups that you're involved with that you think would be interested in having a conversation with MassDEP, I'm always game for that. Just reach out to me, and always happy to schedule follow-up calls and meetings as we go here, because we do know that we need a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion to inform what we're doing, and we want to make sure that what we're doing is going to work effectively and be informed by real world input. So that's really critical for us. With that, I will wrap things up. We did pretty well, only 3 minutes over by my clock here. So that's pretty good. Thanks everyone who joined today for your participation. If you had questions and comments and we didn't get to those, I apologize, but we'll circle back with you following the call and get back to you on any questions and comments that we did not get to this morning. So thanks again. I hope everyone has a great day and stay cool out there. It's getting hot. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.